Deep in the mist-choked ridges of the northern Appalachian Mountains, there's a name the wind carries in broken whispers, one that mothers refuse to say out loud, and old men spit on the ground just thinking about. They used to call her mother Tabitha. She lived in a crooked wooden cabin nestled between hills that looked more like burial mounds than peaks. Nobody knew where she came from. No horse, no cart, no family. Just a smile that never reached her eyes, and a voice that hummed lullabies older than English. She came offering help. Free childcare, they said, a gift to struggling farming families. And when you're breaking your back to grow potatoes on cursed soil, free help looks like salvation. At first, she was a blessing, kind, quiet, always with her door open and tea boiling on the stove. Parents dropped their kids off in the mornings and picked them up after dusk. The children came back sleepy, but unharmed. She tells the best stories. They'd whisper. She sings while the trees move. Nobody asked what that meant. Why would they? Harvests were good that year. Crops thick, livestock healthy. The woods, for once, kept their wolves. And yet, something in the air changed. One child fell ill, then another, and another. Always the younger ones. Always the soft-spoken. Weak hearts, the town doctor said. A fever, said another. But the mothers began to see a pattern. All the dead children had one thing in common. They had stayed with Mother Tabitha. Bruises shaped like handprints appeared on tiny wrists. Dirt beneath fingernails that had never touched soil. They stopped singing her songs. The final straw came with a boy named Elias. He was 10, stubborn, sharp-eyed, always watching. One evening, his parents sent him to fetch his younger brother, Caleb, from the old woman's cabin. The sun had bled dry behind the hills, and mist clung low like spiderwebs. Elias reached the porch, noticed the door ajar, creaking with the wind. He called out. No answer. What he saw inside would never leave him. The floor was bare except for a circle of ash and bone. In the center, Tabitha spun and danced, her limbs bending at impossible angles. But she wasn't alone. Towering behind her stood something horned, like a stag, but taller than any man, its fingers long and bark-like, tapping a rhythm against its own ribcage. Around them, the children stood, eyes open, mouths shut. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe. Caleb among them, silent, dead. The smell hit Elias like a slap. Boiled marrow and rot, wet fur and burnt teeth. His body moved before his mind caught up. He ran, through the trees, over roots and bone shards. He didn't stop until he collapsed in the village square, face pale as moonlight, screaming words no child should know. She's not a woman, he said. She's a puppet made of dead kids. Panic spread like fire in a dry barn. Fathers grabbed axes. Mothers clutched rosaries. Together they marched into the hills, Elias leading with shaking hands. They reached the cabin, only to find silence. No Tabitha, no children, no horn thing, just the smell, and the dress, hanging neatly over a crooked chair. A dress stitched from something foul, bone. They stepped closer, hearts pounding in unison. The dress was filled with ribs, small, clean, and sewn like armor. A child's jawbone dangled like a pendant. Vertebrae laced together down the spine of the gown, where the heart should have been a shattered skull, cracked open and still dripping with wax. Someone screamed. No one remembers who. They burned the cabin, watched the flames rise like judgment. The fire howled as if something inside it mourned. Ash fell like snow. They thought it was over, thought they'd killed the witch, but the bones never burned. Not completely. The next morning, all that remained were the dress and a trail of blackened footprints leading into the woods. They followed them for a mile before they vanished, just like her. Years passed, but the whispers didn't stop. Hunters spoke of hearing lullabies in the trees. Children reported dreams of a lady with twig hands offering warm soup. Once, during a cold October, a boy went missing. His dog was found with its spine cleanly removed. In its place, a doll made of teeth. She's feeding again, the elders said, and locked their doors. They say she was never human. That Tabitha was just a name she borrowed, like a skin. That the horned figure wasn't her companion, but her true self, wearing a face the townsfolk would accept. An old god from beneath the roots, a collector of children. And she, his puppet bride, danced to keep him full. They say the bones keep her together. That's why she takes them. Hikers go missing around those hills. Fog thicker than it should be. Compass needles spin wild. Phones die without warning. And sometimes, only sometimes, you'll hear music, not loud, but sweet, like a mother humming while stirring soup. Some say that if you follow the sound, you'll find a cabin, neat, inviting, with toys in the yard. You might even see children playing. If you knock, she'll answer. Wrinkled hands, soft eyes, smelling of lavender and something else. She'll ask if you have little ones. She loves company, she'll say. Misses the laughter. If you say yes, she'll offer to babysit, just for a while, just until you're done with chores. That's how she gets them, smiling, always smiling. The wind carries her name sometimes, low and broken, like a cracked bone underfoot. Mother Tabitha, never louder than a whisper, but enough. Enough to make you stop in your tracks. The animals go still. The birds refuse to sing. That's when you know you've stepped too close to her domain. So remember this, horror lovers. If you're ever wandering the Appalachian woods and smell something strange, like burnt ivory and cold iron, don't follow it. Don't listen to the singing. And above all, if you see a kind old woman asking about your children, lie and run, because if you don't, you might just become part of the next dress, and the bones will dance again. Imagine a sunset so red it looks like the sky itself is hemorrhaging, and someone nearby is laughing because they made it happen. Yeah, tonight we're hiking deep into the Appalachian backwoods, to a hamlet with a name that sounds like a punchline you choke on. Booger Hole, West Virginia. Locals spit that name like a curse, then glance at the tree line, as if it might spit back. Our guide is a woman named Ira, and she swears every syllable of what you're about to hear is gospel. She remembers the smell of rotting pine, the taste of iron on the fog, the way the wind refused to cross a certain clearing, and above everything else, she remembers Grandma Thorne, the witch whose death was supposed to end the nightmare, but only kicked off the encore. Buckle up, dark-souled friends, because the next 15 paragraphs might leave your flashlight flickering. Ira arrived in Booger Hole the way most people wander into bad decisions, young, hopeful, and married to a man who promised adventure. The village clung to the mountains like a tick, its crooked cabins shingled with moss rather than slate, their windows stingy slits that never seemed big enough to let the moonbeams escape. Folks there smiled without showing teeth and spoke in half sentences, as if the rest of their words were being held hostage. Only one path mattered, a mud vein that led from the main road straight toward a thicket where the trees tangled like gossiping grandmothers. In that gloom crouched a lopsided shack, wearing curtains thick as funeral drapes. That was Grandma Thorne's place, and even crows refused to land on its roof. The townspeople blamed her for every stillborn calf, every sour jar of jam, every nightmare that tasted a little too real. They called her the old woman, never mother, never gran. Family was biology. Thorne was mythology. Legend said she could hex a clock into skipping an hour, or compel smoke to crawl back into the chimney. Somebody swore they'd watched her hold a dying sparrow to her lips, breathe out, and release a rejuvenated bat. Neighbors convinced themselves the forest line bent away from her door, as though the maples feared getting caught eavesdropping. Ira tried to wave off the rumors, but each story clung like wood smoke to her clothes. Even her new husband dodged discussions about visits. She's harmless if you're polite, he'd mutter, which is exactly what people say right before they're politely devoured. One sticky July dusk, a neighbor named Andrew Pike stomped up Grandma Thorne's porch to borrow her only horse. The mare's ribs were harps, her eyes twin lanterns of permanent midnight. Thorne studied Andrew with pupils so black they looked like bullet holes punched through her skull. Then, with a voice wobbly as old porch wood, she rasped, "Treat her gentle, boy." Andrew smirked, tipped his hat, and galloped off as if he'd just cheated the devil at cards. He returned the animal before dawn, lathered and trembling. Thorne emerged, shadow first, body second, and declared, "You'll wake tomorrow as weary as this beast." It sounded like a bedtime story, until sunrise hammered open Andrew's lids and found him already exhausted, purple crescents trenching his cheeks. He babbled about endless dream riding in a pitch-black arena, where hooves struck sparks on nothingness. Andrew's condition worsened. He couldn't lift a milk pail without collapsing. Locals muttered that his shadow lagged 3 steps behind him, like even it was too tired to keep up. The doctor prescribed tonics. The preacher prescribed prayer. Neither outshouted Thorne's whispered verdict. The episode stapled a new page into village folklore. Mess with the mayor, carry the nightmare. Ira watched Andrew's ruin and felt a chill of recognition. Grandma Thorne's sentence had come true with courtroom precision. That revelation sprouted dread, but also an inconvenient curiosity. What other truths could the witch wring from silence? It's funny how humans are moths. Show us a forbidden flame, and we'll singe our wings, just to taste the light. Autumn jack-o'-lantern the hills, when a stone mason named Henry Dodge vanished after collecting wages at the tavern. Suspicions boomeranged toward Otis Miller, a jealous drinking buddy, But nobody could find the body. Trails wound through the forest like tangled spines. Pick the wrong one, and you might end up chewing on your own fear for days. The sheriff organized a search party that trudged in circles, while leaves died noisily underfoot. That's when Grandma Thorne shuffled from her porch, as though gravity itself had summoned her. She gripped a clay pipe carved with symbols too ancient to interpret, lit it with a twig that caught flame without tinder, and croaked, "Give me time to finish this smoke, and I'll tell you where Henry's bones nap." Laughter fluttered up, nervous, brittle. Nobody laughed when the pipe ember winked out, and Thorne pointed a crooked finger toward a knoll behind the church. Shovels cleaved soil like peeling scabs, and there lay Henry, face eaten away by the slow appetite of worms. The discovery snapped collective reason like a wishbone. Some villagers kissed their prayer beads. Others stared at Thorne as if she were the earth's own confession. For the sheriff, the revelation was a double-edged blade. Case closed, yet a new fear unsheathed. Because if Thorne could read the dead earth like Braille, what other secrets pulsed beneath her thumbs? Meanwhile, Ira's nights filled with fractured sleep, dreams of red suns dripping into her backyard, of horses champing at darkness, of a pipe ember blinking Morse code from the treeline. She woke each dawn tasting ash. The body's unearthing didn't crown Thorne queen. It painted a target on her hunching silhouette. Guilt, after all, is just fear dressed in work boots. And both Andrew and Otis wore a heavy pair. Andrew blamed his sleepless decay on the crone's words. Otis blamed his impending noose on her revelations. Moonshine-slick conversations hatched a whispered verdict. Remove the witch, reclaim their lives. Booger Hole's tavern grew thick with plot spores, drifting from lip to lip. Ira overheard snatches, rock salt, buckshot, do it before the first frost. Each half-sentence felt like a nail being driven into an invisible coffin. One November night, frost lace glazed the windows, and the wind sounded like it had bones. Ira dozed beside her husband when the dark fractured with a single gunshot, distant yet intimate, like thunder crouching beside the bed. Silence puddled afterward, too deep, too sudden. Dogs in the valley whined but refused to bark, as though even they knew some noises invite retaliation. Ira's husband muttered it was probably a poacher, but his voice lacked architecture. They both lay still, counting heartbeats that felt borrowed. Dawn limped over the ridgeline, wearing a bruise-colored sky. Word spread faster than fire on kerosene quilts. Something happened at the Thorne cabin. Ira and her husband joined the procession of rubberneckers trudging through brittle grass. The cabin's lone window yawned a jagged grin, where glass had exploded inward. Inside, Grandma Thorne sat in her rocker, pipe between two frozen fingers, a neat .32 caliber hole just above her left eye. Blood had dried in a rill down her cheek, painting her smile wider, yet the pipe still smoldered, its ember pulsing like a heartbeat that refused to sign the death certificate. One brave soul claimed the bullet hadn't shattered her skull until after her lungs quit, as if she'd waited, out of spite or ritual, for the murderer to pull the trigger on a corpse. The sheriff poked around, found muddy boot prints that overlapped like troubled thoughts, and concluded nothing. Andrew wept at the funeral, looking somehow more rested than he had in months. Otis stood back, jaw clenched, pupils dilated enough to swallow daylight. Rumors pinballed, Andrew crawling through the window with borrowed courage, Otis lurking in the tree line with vengeance rattling inside his coat. No arrests, no confessions, just a community stitching denial into its collective quilt. They buried Thorne on unconsecrated ground because no preacher wanted her ghost haunting the pews. The coffin splintered on the way down, like the earth itself was reluctant to swallow. Death should have ended the legend, right? Spoiler. Legends are iron nails. They don't rot. They rust and spread. Soon children whispered of a pinprick of orange light bouncing between oaks on moonless nights. Lumberjacks swore they heard a rocker creaking where no porch existed. A deputy followed the glow once, said the deeper he walked the more the trees leaned away, forming a funnel that aimed him toward a clearing stinking of wet copper. He turned back when he saw a shape hunched over fresh-turned soil, puffing on a pipe that lit her face from below, like a jack-o'-lantern carved too lovingly. Ira tried leaving Booger Hole, but every path twisted her car around and spat her back at the same sagging sign. Welcome to Booger Hole. P.O.P. who's counting? She took to pacing nights, window to window, listening for that rocker's phantom squeal. Sometimes she glimpsed the ember hovering behind the treeline, as if inviting her to parley. Her husband begged her to forget. She replied, "You can't forget a firefly when it's carrying your name." Black humor, sure, but her laugh sounded like glass grinding on stone. One clabbered-thin evening, Ira ventured outside with only a lantern and a heart-beating Morse code for run. The forest swallowed her like gossip. She tailed the glow through briars that snagged her nightgown, past stumps shaped like kneeling penitents, until the earth beneath her turned unnaturally soft. The air reeked of pipe smoke and secrets. Beneath her boots, she saw a shallow mound studded with finger-thick roots. No bones, human cracked, arranged in a circle like they'd grown there. The ember paused atop the pile, then winked out, plunging her into pitch so thick it felt like hands over her eyes. From inches away, a voice, raspy, amused, so very tired, whispered, "Now you know where the truth sleeps." Ira fled and survived. But survival is a loose term when your memory is a bleeding sun that never sets. She tells anyone who'll listen. If you ever find yourself in Booger Hole after dark, and you spy a lonely spark bobbing in the cedar gloom, walk the other way, fast. Don't borrow horses. Don't borrow promises, and for the love of whatever keeps your soul tethered, don't accept guidance from a widow who already wrote your eulogy, because Grandma Thorne may be dead, but death is just a boring retirement plan for a witch who once made the daylight hemorrhage, and she's oh so very tired of retirement. Imagine you're perched on a cliff, so dark you can't see your own hands, and suddenly the night grows eyes. Burning, curious eyes that refused to blink. That was the moment Brown Mountain stopped being a tourist trap and became a hunting ground. And our poor skeptic Julian learned that disbelief is not body armor. It's a kick me, sign you wear for the unknown. Stick around, because by the time this tale is done, you'll think twice before chasing mysterious lights or anything else that stares back. Brown Mountain sits in North Carolina like a jagged black tooth, and every October the air up there turns dry and brittle, cracking underfoot, while low fog slithers between the trees. Local legends call the wisps spirit fingers, but Julian never bought the merch. He was the type who laughed at campfire yarns, convinced that every ghost was a misidentified headlight and every UFO was just a tipsy drone. So when his buddies Rachel and Vince dared him to tag along for a midnight stakeout, Julian packed extra batteries, not sage, and promised to debunk whatever nonsense floated by. After all, what could a few stargazing millennials possibly run into besides disappointment and a chilly breeze? Fate grinned. The trio's destination, Wiseman's View, is basically a stone diving board jutting over a canyon that drops so deep you could dump secrets there and never hear them land. On most nights, it's clogged with hikers filming shaky TikToks. But that evening the overlook was deserted, the air thick with the hush of an audience waiting for curtains to rise. Rachel chewed her lip, half hoping for fireworks. Vince adjusted his GoPro like a gamer spamming record. Julian scoffed, repeating his mantra, seeing is believing, but seeing rarely happens. They waited. Crickets timed their heartbeats. Minutes felt like wet wool. Midnight crept past. Even the Milky Way seemed bored. Had they hauled themselves up here just to inhale mountain dust? Then the first light twitched into existence, no bigger than a candle ember, yet so sharp it carved a pinhole through the void. Julian's smirk faltered. The speck didn't flicker like a campfire or sway like a plane. It hovered, self-possessed, ignoring the wind's push. Rachel whispered something that evaporated in the sudden vacuum of sound, and Vince's camera chimed red as it locked focus. The light glided sideways, against the breeze, against logic, like a thought changing its mind. Before anyone exhaled, a second orb blinked on, then a third, arranging themselves in an eerie scalene triangle that pulsed as if breathing. Their colors shifted, phantom blues bleeding into surgical whites, moving in tandem, choreographed without strings. Drone squad, Vince muttered, but his voice quivered, glitching mid-sentence. Julian wanted to laugh it off, yet the lights didn't behave like technology. They danced, swooped, and pirouetted as though teasing gravity, then froze, perfectly still, directly across the abyss. Silence thickened until their own heartbeats felt impolite. Rachel's eyes glossed over with awe and something that looked like dread. That's when she voiced the thought. They all felt tiptoeing up their spines. They're watching us. The orbs dimmed, then guttered out, plunging the overlook back into starless ink. Relief lasted a single heartbeat, just long enough for the night to inhale. In that drawn-out breath, the atmosphere changed. The very air seemed to clot. Sound died, no insects, no branches creaking, like the mountain had slapped duct tape over reality's mouth. Out of the fog on the opposite ridge, a silhouette coagulated, taller than a man but lacking mass. A negative space that bent moonlight around it like a cloak. There was no face, just an absence that felt hungrier than sight. It stepped forward without crunching leaves, its edges rippling like a VHS glitch. Even from that distance, Julian swore it fixed on him specifically, as if he were a finger puppet whose strings it already held. Logic blew a fuse. Rachel's composure shattered first. Tears streaked her cheeks without a single sob. Vince's stomach convulsed, splatters echoing in the silence that somehow made no sound. Julian, ever the pragmatist, found his limbs locked, nerves hijacked by an ice-water current of pure dread. Inside his skull, a whisper slithered, words shaped in a voice not born of lungs. "You saw too much." The sentence hammered against bone, leaving comprehension bruised. The shadow began to descend the slope. No urgency, just inevitability. Each step bleeding distance, like ink in water. The trio broke. Lantern beams jittered through branches as they bolted down the trail. Physics forgotten. Feet skidded on gravel. Backpack straps whipping. Fog materialized in unnatural bursts. Pockets of cotton that ignited with those same cold lights, now strobing inches from their faces. At one point, an orb blinked into existence between Julian's ribs and his fleeing heart, illuminating his organs in X-ray clarity before vanishing. Every breath tasted metallic, like pennies dissolving on tongues. Somewhere behind, something heavier than mist rustled foliage, with deliberate patience, never hurrying, confident its prey would trip eventually. Julian's skepticism collapsed under primal screams his throat couldn't afford to make. They reached the parking lot only to find the Subaru cocooned in interior fog, windows opaque, condensation swirling as though a cloud had been sealed inside. The headlights flickered, but the engine was stone dead. Key fobs clicked uselessly. Rachel's knuckles bled from hammering the hood. Vince's camera lay forgotten, its lens fractured like a blinded eye. Julian circled the vehicle and saw, pressed against the rear glass, 3 pale points of light forming that same triangle, glowing from within the vapor. That's when the mountains ceded them a sliver of mercy, the beam of a pickup truck slicing through darkness. The driver, a grizzled hunter reeking of pine tar and cold coffee, didn't wait for explanations. He threw open the cab door, muttering, "Get in if you want to keep your skin," as though he'd rehearsed the line for years. As they sped downhill, Julian risked a glance back. The overlook pulsed with dozens, maybe hundreds, of lights now. A galaxy uprooted and replanted on Earth, swirling like bait in deep water. The hunter spat tobacco into a bottle and muttered, "Most who see him don't come back talking." No one dared ask how he knew. The silence inside the cab felt stitched with secrets. Days blurred into sleep-starved weeks. Rachel woke screaming from dreams where the silhouette stood at the foot of her bed, dripping static. Vince's vomit turned to migraines, then to catatonic spells, where he scrawled concentric circles on every scrap of paper, 3 dots dead center like bullet holes. Julian spiraled into restless paranoia, covering mirrors, unplugging every LED, convinced reflections were windows for things best left unseen. He tried explaining it all to a therapist, but sentences collapsed under their own absurdity. Horror, it seems, is tax-exempt from language. Eventually, even daylight felt counterfeit. 3 months later, a sticky note on Rachel's empty apartment read, "Gone to watch the sky." Her car remained in the lot, keys inside, doors ajar as if she'd never worried about returning. Search parties scoured Brown Mountain, but found only cigarette butt constellations at Wiseman's View and a lingering ozone smell. Meanwhile, Vince's drawings evolved into elaborate cartographies, maps depicting tunnels of light spiraling beneath the Appalachians, their entrances marked by that damn triangle. He no longer spoke English, or any language recognizable. He hummed a single droning note that made dogs howl and glass quiver. Julian's skepticism calcified into haunted certainty. He smashed every bulb in his condo, taped black trash bags over windows, and lived by candlelight. Ironic, given how a tiny light started this. Friends called him paranoid. He preferred prepared. On cloudless nights, he heard faint tapping, like fingertips on glass, from the covered panes. Once he peeled back a corner, just an inch, and a pinpoint of white glared back, reflecting infinite patience. He stapled the plastic shut and curled on the floor, telling himself darkness is safer because it hides you from what lives inside the glow. Now Julian speaks only in warnings. He hasn't climbed a hill since that night, avoids screens brighter than a match flame, and flinches when decorative LEDs pop up in grocery aisles. He's learned that those orbs aren't lanterns guiding the lost. They're anglerfish lures dangling off something colossal and hungry. Belief, he says, is like blood in the water. Once they know you accept their existence, They follow the scent, laugh at the lights, and they flicker away. Believe. And they engrave your name on an itinerary with no return date. Skepticism isn't just healthy, it's life insurance. So here's your final boarding call, thrill seekers. If you ever hike to Brown Mountain and spot a lonely flame pirouetting in the void, don't salute it with your camera flash. Don't whisper, "Wow, it's real." Instead, blink slow, turn casual, and let disbelief shield you like a lead apron. Because the moment you grant those lights meaning, they grant you an audience. And tickets to their show are strictly one way. Sleep tight, keep your skeptic badge polished, and remember, some mysteries don't want solving, they want surrender. Catch you on the next nightmare, if the mountain lets you go. Buckle that headlamp tight, because tonight we're trekking straight into the black lungs of the Appalachian Trail, where the trees gossip in fractured syllables, and the wind steals footprints as payment for passing through. Picture this. A seasoned hiker, calloused feet, and nerves like braided steel, carving miles alone under a glass-clear winter sky. He's faced snapping coyotes, sleet sharp as razors, and snakes that shimmer like wet cables in moonlight, and still whistled himself to sleep. But on the 21st night, somewhere in that no-man's land between Tennessee and North Carolina, an unnamed presence slithered out of silence and rewrote the very idea of solitude. Before dawn broke, he would learn that some things in the mountains don't just watch. They breathe with you, pace your pulse, and whisper promises you never wanted to hear. Ready to inhale dread with every step, our guy had pitched his one-person tent between two granite fangs, jutting from frozen soil. Feeling smug about the natural windbreak, the sunset wrapped everything in funeral parlor pink, then slipped behind the ridgeline like a stagehand calling lights out. As darkness congealed, so did that brutal, hush-all-life silence only high mountain winter can produce. No owls hooting for mates, no distant stream mumbling bedtime gossip. He devoured a protein bar that tasted like cherry-flavored regret, checked his topo map for morning bearings, and slid into a sleeping bag rated for temperatures that freeze spit. Before zipping the fly, he lobbed a half-hearted joke to the indifferent void. "Try me." Mountain humor, right? Little did he know the range wasn't laughing. It was leaning in, nostrils flaring, curious about the mortal who dared to taunt the dark. At exactly 2 a.m., he'd later confirmed by the fuzzy green digits on his cheap wristwatch, his eyes snapped open without any audible cue. No twig snap, no groan of shifting rock. What roused him was colder, subtler, a pressure in the air, like the entire altitude had dropped into his chest cavity. Every follicle on his body rose in unison, a silent army, saluting an unseen general. He held his breath, listening, and that's when he heard the other breath, heavy and deliberate, sliding in and out right next to the nylon wall. Imagine a walrus with bronchitis sucking steam through a snorkel. Slow, wet, purposeful. Each exhale made the tent fabric billow inward, matching his own heartbeat, until it felt like the stranger and he was sharing a single diseased lung. Okay, big girl pants time, he thought, though nothing below his neck complied. Muscles locked, as if fear had poured molten lead into every joint. Coyotes don't breathe like that. Bears don't either. And besides, a bear's paw would have flattened the tent by now. He tried to rationalize. Wind gust? Nope. The night lay dead calm, so quiet you could hear frost crystals forming on your eyelashes. Suddenly the presence pressed closer, the nylon tightening, as though an unseen face were sniffing seams for weaknesses. Hot moisture bled through the fabric, fogging in the frigid air. A childhood memory, Dad leaning close to see if he was faking sleep, flashed through his mind, and for a pitiful second he almost giggled. Then the stench hit, metallic, coppery, like pennies boiled in spoiled milk. No predator he'd researched carried that sickly scent. Minutes or decades, hard to tell, slithered past. The breathing never sped up, never hurried, simply persisted like an old metronome, keeping time for a funeral dirge. He realized with creeping horror that the rhythm had synced with his lungs. Inhale together, exhale together, a forced duet. Ever try to stop breathing just to break the beat? He did, and the thing paused, hovering in anticipation, then resumed the instant he involuntarily gasped. The nylon sagged inward as if to kiss him. Somewhere in the back of his skull, a voice muttered, "She's learning you." That was the moment he understood the mountains weren't home to cryptids that hunted flesh. They housed curiosities that studied being. He wasn't prey. He was a living encyclopedia volume labeled hiker. At what felt like the 30-minute mark, though time had lost its spine, Everything stopped. No intake, no exhale. The tent walls hung slack. Relief? Not a chance. The silence that followed was the auditory equivalent of falling into black water. You don't hear the splash, only the void closing overhead. Even the usual Appalachian night chorus, wind threading through spruce, distant creek babbling folklore, remained gagged. That oppressive stillness convinced him the entire ridge had turned off the sound to eavesdrop on his terror. A morbid part of him considered unzipping the flap to peek. Curiosity may kill cats, but hikers die from missteps, and this would be the biggest misstep of all. Yet staying folded in nylon ignorance felt equally lethal. Damned if you do, devoured if you don't. Dawn's first smear of gray finally bled across the sky. Our protagonist lay trembling, feeling absurdly grateful for the mundane chirp of a single, brave chickadee signaling shift change. He counted to 10, twice, and forced himself upright, every joint popping like cheap bubble wrap. The tent zipper screeched louder than a banshee's manicure, and he half expected claws to claw back. Nothing, just brittle air, crystalline frost, and his own frantic breath puffing into ghosts. He stepped out, knees quaking, and scanned the campsite the way a crime scene tech scans for shell casings. Nothing looked disturbed until he saw the impressions in the frozen dirt, leading from the treeline to his shelter like breadcrumbs baked in nightmare batter. Three-toed prints, each the size of a skillet, sank deep into permafrost as though left by something heavier than an elk, but more deliberate than a moose. The claws punctured the soil with surgical precision, implying intelligence, not brute trampling. He traced them with a gloved finger, half expecting residual heat. Instead, a chill radiated upward, shocking even through insulation. He followed the trail around the tent, one full orbit, like a shark circling a dinghy, ending at the exact spot where the nylon had puffed in and out. There, the claw tips had raked a wide semicircle, shaping a perfect half-moon trench. But it was the writing inside that shallow bowl of dirt that buckled his gut. Es estava te conhecendo, claw-scrawled in sloppy Portuguese, letters formed by dragging a single talon through mud and frost. He recognized enough of the language from hostile chatter to translate. I was just getting to know you. The phrase felt playful, almost flirtatious, which made it astronomically worse. Who or what learned your breathing cadence before leaving friendly graffiti at sunrise? He gagged, stomach revolting not from gore, but from existential violation. The way someone might vomit after hearing a burglar say, "Nice family photos." The message proved the entity possessed not only awareness, but multilingual mischievous intent. Somewhere in the icy distance, a woodpecker hammered, sounding suspiciously like applause. Panic is a sprinter, survival is a marathoner. He stuffed gear with reckless speed but methodical order. No way was he leaving evidence of himself behind. Every gum wrapper, every shard of paracord vanished into the pack. He doused the fire pit, though it had never been lit, purely out of ritual. Leave no trace, and maybe the mountain leaves none of you. While collapsing the tent, he noticed fine strands of silver hair, or filament, caught in the rainfly seam. They glistened like spider silk, yet felt coarser, reminiscent of horse mane run through glacier water. He pocketed a strand, part scientist, part masochist, thinking maybe DNA analysis could explain away nightmares. Spoiler: nightmares don't respect lab work. As daylight strengthened, the forest soundtrack returned in uncomfortable bursts. Squirrel chatter, crow sarcasm, wind rehearsing ballads. But each sound felt off-key, as though the unseen conductor lacked practice. He set a blistering pace down trail, packed thumping like a second heart. Yet every mile only inflated his unease. The woods were no longer backdrop, but witness. Branches seemed to bend inward, offering shade that felt like shielding or maybe surveillance. Once, he caught himself counting breaths aloud, checking they were still his alone. When he tried forcing a laugh to cut tension, it croaked out broken, like a cassette mangled in a dashboard player. Humor, it seems, dehydrates fastest under fear. After 6 hours, he reached a ranger station, a rustic hut smelling of damp wool and unspoken confessions. The Lone Ranger on duty, a retiree with whiskers the color of ash, offered coffee that tasted like burnt secrets. Our hiker relayed the night's incident, expecting ridicule or at least an eyebrow arch. Instead, the ranger's face drained of blood, leaving parchment skin tight across cheekbones. Without a word, the old-timer unlocked a metal drawer and produced a dog-eared binder labeled Unclassified Encounters. Inside, sketches of similar three-toed prints, reports of synchronized breathing outside tents, even a faded Polaroid of clawed words in multiple languages: Greek, Cree, Mandarin. The ranger whispered, "She's as old as these hills, son. Likes to study folks. Always polite. Until somebody runs." Gooseflesh marched up his arms as the ranger continued in a graveyard register. According to Appalachian lore, Ella, they never risked naming her fully, isn't animal nor spirit, but an inquiry made flesh. A living question mark prowling the ridgelines. She samples humanity the way sommeliers sniff corks, collecting fears, dialects, heartbeats. Those who stand their ground become pages in her endless field notes. Those who flee risk, promoting her curiosity into obsession. The binder's final entry, dated 1987, described a through hiker who bolted after a midnight encounter. Search teams later found only boot prints ending at a cliff edge and letters etched into limestone. Volto logo. Be right back. The ranger snapped the folder shut like a coffin lid and advised, "Next time, breathe slow." She enjoys rhythm. Our protagonist left the station shaking harder than that cheap coffee maker. Resolve crystallizing into one unbreakable rule: no more solo camping. He sold gear online, ghosted trail friends, and traded summit panoramas for urban skylines, humming with reassuring human static. Yet safety proved illusory. Street lamps sometimes flickered in perfect sync with his breathing. Elevators exhaled behind him with that same wet heaviness. One night, he found the silver filament taped to his apartment door, shape curved like a smile. He mailed the strand to a lab. Results unread, shredded by shaky hands, because some envelopes should never be opened. Some data points best left unplotted. You can escape mileage, but you can't outrun research interests of the inhumanly curious. So here's your moral. Dear night crawlers, the wilderness doesn't merely hide claws and fangs. It conceals curiosities older than language, entities that collect you the way you collect stamps or stickers on a trail journal. Next time you feel alone under a vault of stars and think the silence is peaceful, ask yourself, is that stillness really serenity? Or is something matching its breath to yours, drafting your obituary one inhalation at a time? Keep your campfire small, your bravado smaller, and maybe, just maybe, she'll file you under observed instead of missing. Until then, zip those tents tight, count those breaths, and never forget, in the Appalachians, being known is far deadlier than being lost. Sleep tight if you dare.